My brother called me a day or so later and said, "Do you have a gun in the house?" And I said, "No."
What was it, or who, that pushed him to pick up a gun?
Biggest case.
There's only two logical reasons. One is they've lost the evidence, which I hope isn't true. Or two, they're protecting somebody that...
One thing that's truly surprising in his story, the police are the villains. And what else?
Somebody asked me the other day, "Do you think JonBenét's killer would be found in your lifetime?" I don't know.
It's almost ironic. He said exactly what we've all been thinking. How much longer until JonBenét gets justice? And yet, it only took one interview, the loudest, most publicized interview John's done in years. People felt his pain. But people also knew he was lying. So what did John really say?
I've done a number of interviews over the years, and my main reason for engaging the media is to keep pressure on the police to do their job. And I've never wanted the questions in advance because I want to respond spontaneously.
The only guest of this interview is John Ramsey, father of JonBenét Ramsey, the 6-year-old girl whose unsolved murder became one of the most haunting cases in American history. The conversation took place at the invitation of a popular podcast channel, a show dedicated to revisiting cold cases and criminal mysteries. The interview occurs decades after the murder, at a particularly sensitive time. A new documentary about JonBenét's case was in the works, and John had started actively campaigning for the implementation of the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act in Colorado, a law designed to allow victims' families to request federal review when local investigations stall or fail. Unlike tightly controlled media appearances, this conversation was different by design. John made it clear from the beginning that there would be no script, no pre-approved questions, and nothing was off the record. He wanted to respond spontaneously and honestly, without filtering or preparing his answers ahead of time. To him, the media was the last remaining tool to hold the Boulder Police Department accountable and push for meaningful action in a case that had gone cold for far too long. Beyond the primary objective of applying pressure on law enforcement, the interview also served to challenge long-standing misconceptions and internet theories that had plagued his family for years, particularly those targeting his late wife, Patsy Ramsey, and their son, Burke Ramsey. John firmly emphasized his belief that critical DNA evidence still exists, and that modern technology may finally uncover the truth, if authorities are willing to act. It's an undeniable fact that, in the eyes of many, John Ramsey remains a primary suspect in the unsolved murder of his daughter. Known for his calculated composure in front of the media, his words have often been viewed with suspicion, carefully crafted, possibly strategic. But in this interview, stripped of legal advisors and PR filters, we take a closer look at what he actually said and what it might reveal. With a polite way to start, John said that after nearly 3 decades since the murder of his daughter JonBenét, he carries the weight of that loss in a way that never truly lifts. In his mind, JonBenét is forever 6 years old. He admits that he's unable to imagine her as a grown woman, her memory frozen in time, preserved in the innocence and energy of a child who never got the chance to grow up. For him, she never changed, never aged. The image of her has stayed still while everything else moved forward.
I've learned 2 things. One, life's not easy all the time, and life's not always fair. And it's like, okay, those are the game rules. Let's keep at it.
Despite the overwhelming nature of the tragedy, John doesn't feel like he's stuck in 1996. Instead, he describes having learned to accept the rules of life, understanding that things aren't always fair and that life isn't always easy. That acceptance, however difficult, is what helped him keep going. Rather than being emotionally paralyzed by the moment, he made the decision to keep living, not out of healing, but out of necessity.
And for Patsy and I, we fortunately, what really got us up off the floor was the realization we have 3 other children now that need us desperately to be strong. They're hurt, they're crushed, they've lost. At their age, they shouldn't have to deal with the loss and death of a family member.
There were moments when grief felt too heavy to bear, and in those times, he allowed himself brief periods of sorrow. He and Patsy never collapsed at the same time. When one of them broke down, the other held steady. This balance between them became their way of surviving. It wasn't a grand or graceful recovery, but rather a series of staggered stumbles forward, one helping the other stay on their feet. His words sound really moving, but they stand in stark contrast to widely circulated accounts, suggesting the couple's relationship was strained during that time, with signs of emotional distance reportedly surfacing even before JonBenét's death. Some have gone further, alleging that John himself may have been at the center of that growing divide. Back to his words, he said that even now there are signs that the trauma never truly left. Moving to the more difficult questions related to Patsy, John provided heartfelt insights into his late wife Patsy's character and the unfair scrutiny she faced following their daughter, JonBenét's murder.
Patsy was a very strong woman. Maybe didn't come across so good on television, I was told by people. But she was a wonderful mother. She's a wonderful stepmother. And I never heard her say anything negative about anybody.
He described Patsy as a devoted and loving mother, emphasizing her strength and kindness, particularly in her role as a stepmother to his older children. He expressed deep frustration over the media and public fixation on Patsy as a suspect, noting that her strong personality may not have translated well on television, which contributed to negative perceptions. Despite this, John insisted that Patsy never spoke ill of anyone and was deeply committed to their son Burke, focusing on giving him a normal childhood amidst the chaos of the investigation and media frenzy. Regarding the ransom note found in their home, John addressed the suspicion that Patsy wrote it, fueled by its discovery on her notepad and the use of her paintbrush in the crime. He dismissed these accusations as baseless, pointing out that the note's specific demand of $108,000, which matched his bonus, suggested the killer had personal knowledge of their finances, possibly from documents left around the house.
You know, I don't have $118,000 laying around, but a friend of mine, who was my banker, got my ATM limit on my Visa card jacked up. And I gave that card to a friend, I don't know who it was, somebody was there, and said, go get the money.
He argued that the presence of the notepad and paintbrush in their home did not implicate Patsy, as the intruder had access to these items while the family was out. John emphasized that handwriting samples provided by both him and Patsy did not match the note, and he found it absurd that the police clung to this theory despite evidence to the contrary. John also discussed Patsy's interactions with Detective Linda Arndt, who was the primary police contact on the morning of JonBenét's disappearance.
Did her and Patsy end up having a relationship with some
Well, you know, she was our savior. I mean, she came to help us. You know, you call the police, you expect them to come to help. We trusted her initially before we'd seen this report and all these crazy observations. Patsy wanted to know who killed her daughter. And what are you doing? What's going on? That was the kind of the level of conversation, I'm pretty sure.
Gary Oliva, did you want to talk about him?
Oh, yeah, he was the lead that the DA gave us.
Initially, both he and Patsy trusted Linda, viewing her as their savior and the embodiment of police assistance during their crisis. They believed she was there to help solve the kidnapping, which they thought it was at the time. However, John later learned of Linda's report, which included what he described as irrational observations about their behavior, such as misinterpreting his actions as casual, and noting that he and Patsy were physically separated, with Patsy visibly distraught. He clarified that Patsy was overwhelmed with grief, sitting on the floor and surrounded by friends, while he focused on practical steps to secure the ransom money. Despite their initial trust, John revealed that their faith in Linda eroded as they discovered her biased conclusions, particularly her televised claim that she saw guilt in his eyes. Patsy, desperate for answers, continued to engage with Linda after that first day, seeking updates on the investigation and asking what the police were doing to find JonBenét's killer. John noted that these conversations were driven by Patsy's need to understand the progress of the case, though he could not recall specific details due to the passage of time. He expressed dismay that the police, including Linda, quickly targeted Patsy without substantial evidence, ignoring DNA evidence that pointed to an unidentified male. John's account underscored his unwavering defense of Patsy and his belief that the police's focus on her was a grave injustice. For Burke Ramsey, John emphasized the family's concerted efforts to shield Burke from the chaos surrounding JonBenét's murder, driven by a deep fear that an unknown attacker might target their family again.
We were afraid. Somebody had attacked our family. We don't know who it was. And we were frightened, quite frankly. And one of the challenges was we wanted to keep Burke out of video and pictures so that people would know what he looked like.
He explained that on the morning of the tragedy, with police and media creating a tumultuous environment, they prioritized getting Burke, then a young boy, to a safe place. They sent him to stay with close friends whose son was Burke's age, a familiar and trusted environment, ensuring he could escape the nightmare unfolding at home. Burke took some Christmas presents with him, a small attempt to maintain normalcy amidst the crisis. To protect Burke from media scrutiny, John described elaborate measures to keep him out of the public eye.
We would send out a decoy car. Burke would be in another car on the floor in the back seat.
Just to go to school?
Yeah, to go to school. And we'd get him to school, unphotographed, because we wanted to protect him.
The family used decoy cars to transport him, with Burke lying on the floor of a different vehicle to avoid being photographed by reporters. This strategy allowed him to attend school without being recognized, as they feared media exposure could further endanger or traumatize him. John underscored that their goal was to give Burke as normal a life as possible, despite the constant presence of tabloid headlines featuring his sister's image, which made this task extraordinarily difficult. John was adamant not involving Burke in discussions about the case, deliberately avoiding questions that might burden him with the tragedy. He and Patsy never asked Burke if he sensed or heard anything unusual that night, such as another person in the house, because they wanted to separate him from the chaos. When confronted with claims from a Dr. Phil interview suggesting Burke got up to play, John expressed skepticism, calling it potential fiction, and stating he was unaware of Burke leaving his room. He suggested Burke might have misunderstood the question, reinforcing that they never probed him for details.
Again, when we got home, JonBenét had fallen asleep.
But I know you and Burke
I
came.
put her to bed. Burke and I sat down and tried to put together one of his little toys for a little while, just because he wanted to, and then he went off to bed. I didn't know that he came back down, if he did.
Does
He
stuff
may
like
have-
that make you want to be like, oh my gosh, maybe there's something he knows?
Burke would have said something if something was weird, but
Okay.
he may have misunderstood the question
Sure.
too.
Addressing speculation about Burke's knowledge, John firmly stated that Burke did not hold any overlooked information about the crime. He described Burke as a reliable and disciplined individual who grew into a responsible adult, graduating college and maintaining a stable job. John believed that if Burke knew anything significant, he would have shared it, as any details he might recall would likely seem unimportant to him. He also expressed regret over Burke's Dr. Phil appearance, noting that the public unfairly criticized Burke for smiling during the interview, a natural trait misinterpreted as suspicious. John felt this backlash was unjust, highlighting Burke's character as inherently positive and unaffected by guilt. When God asked about John himself, he shared a deeply personal account of his experiences following JonBenét's murder, revealing the emotional and professional toll it took on him while addressing the suspicions cast upon him.
I was criticized for disturbing the crime scene when I found JonBenét. Oh my God, he removed the body. If you're a parent, what would you do? You'd pick up your child. I was relieved I found her. Thank God. Took the tape off her mouth and tried to untie her wrists. I couldn't because they're tied so tightly. I didn't see the garrote. It was so deeply embedded in her throat. Oh, he disturbed the crime scene. That was wrong. It's like, that's laughable to even say something like that.
He described the morning of the tragedy as a whirlwind of hope and despair, believing initially that JonBenét had been kidnapped and could be saved. Unlike the helpless anger he felt when his older daughter Beth died in a 1992 car accident, which left him furious at God, he felt driven to act decisively to recover JonBenét. When he found her body, his instinct as a father was to pick her up, attempt to remove the tape from her mouth, and try to untie her tightly bound wrists, unaware of the garrote embedded in her neck. He expressed frustration that these natural parental reactions were misinterpreted by police, particularly Detective Linda Arndt, who claimed she saw guilt in his eyes, a judgment he called absurd and indicative of her incompetence. Arndt further scrutinized the way he carried JonBenét's body, noting that he held her by the thighs with her body extended away from his, her head positioned above his own, which prevented him from seeing her face. She found this manner of carrying her, face to face, but at a distance, unusual for a father, especially given JonBenét's obvious death, and considered it a key factor in her suspicion that John was the killer. John dismissed these observations as baseless, emphasizing that his actions were driven by shock and a desperate need to hold his daughter, not by any consciousness of guilt. The suspicions directed at him were compounded by the police's rapid conclusion that he was involved despite a lack of evidence. John recalled being stunned when, the day after JonBenét's death, a colleague warned him that the police believed he was the killer. He felt betrayed, having initially viewed the police as saviors tasked with saving his daughter. Instead, he described their approach as predetermined, focusing on him and Patsy without investigating other leads. Linda Arndt's report, which he later read, included what he considered irrational observations, such as his casual sorting through mail, which he was actually checking for further communication from the supposed kidnapper. The police's strategy, he learned years later from the district attorney, relied on pressuring him and Patsy to force a confession from the innocent spouse, a tactic he found baseless and infuriating. John also addressed the public's perception of him as a cold, wealthy man who didn't love his children, a portrayal fueled by media exaggerations of his financial status.
You know, we were portrayed as very rich people. We didn't consider ourselves rich. We built a little computer business, sold our interest to Lockheed, and
I mean, for like a pretty penny though.
But I got, that was more money than I ever thought I'd have in my life, you know. But we didn't, I still was working, still figured I needed to have a paycheck coming in, and but we were portrayed as I was president of a company that had done $1 billion of revenue. Well, we were a distributor, we're like a grocery store. You got to sell a lot of milk and eggs to make a little bit of money. And that was the kind of business we're in. So in our industry, that was not a huge business, but that was publicized a few weeks before JonBenét was murdered in the local paper.
He clarified that his computer business, sold to Lockheed Martin, was modest in its industry, and he was merely an employee, not a billionaire as depicted. The murder devastated his career, leaving him unemployed for 5 to 7 years as companies refused to hire him, fearing association with the scandal. He and Patsy survived by selling assets, including their home, and while a book advance provided temporary financial relief, he wrote a second book to help others process trauma, not for profit. He dismissed claims that he benefited from the tragedy as absurd, emphasizing the severe financial and emotional strain they endured. John explained that he lost his job due to the intense media scrutiny, with one company explicitly stating they could not hire him because of the negative publicity. He and Patsy faced years of unemployment, forcing them to sell assets, including their home, to survive financially. While they received an advance for their first book, which helped them stay afloat temporarily, John clarified that the second book was written to share their emotional journey and help others, not for profit, as the book market had changed and advances were minimal. Despite the ordeal, John's faith was profoundly tested, as he grappled with how God could allow such a tragedy to befall a child. Yet, he held onto a belief that JonBenét was in heaven, though he admitted he couldn't fully comprehend what that meant.
She had won this little medal in one of her little contests, beauty contests. And I used to tell her, look, it doesn't matter if you're the prettiest or whatever, your little talent is what you should concentrate on. And she was a singer, and always with vigor, but sometimes off key. It wasn't, but she was, boom. And she had her last little event was a couple weeks before she died, and I was late to get there. But I always tried to go to watch her little talent thing. And she came running up to me and said, Dad, I won this for you. And it was a medal, and it was all talent winner.
After her death, he longed to retrieve it, and remarkably, Patsy's sister Pam, guided by what John felt was a spiritual connection, retrieved that very medal from JonBenét's room, bringing him solace. This moment reinforced his sense that JonBenét's presence lingered, offering comfort amid his grief. John Ramsey also addressed accusations that he fled to Atlanta to escape investigation after JonBenét's murder. He explained that Atlanta was the family's true home, where their roots were, including a family cemetery plot where his older daughter Beth, who had died in a car accident 4 years earlier, was buried.
JonBenet was buried there. My oldest daughter was buried there. So I was accused in the media of fleeing to Atlanta.
His focus after finding JonBenét's body was to ensure she was properly laid to rest in Atlanta, a decision driven by familial ties rather than an attempt to evade authorities. He noted that they left Boulder the morning JonBenet was found and never returned to their home there, a departure he described as final but not secretive.
One of the detectives, there's only one detective there that morning. Everybody else was on vacation. It was day after Christmas. But there were lots of detectives and police there. And I can't remember what I said, but I want to go home. And he said, yeah, that's fine, go. And Lockheed sent one of their airplanes out, which is wonderful, and flew us back to Atlanta.
He recalled asking a detective if they could leave, and the officer explicitly permitted it, indicating no intent to detain them. The trip to Atlanta was facilitated by Lockheed Martin, his employer, which provided a private plane to transport John, Patsy, Burke, and a friend of Burke's. In Atlanta, John emphasized that they sought solace and support from family and friends, not anonymity. Their stay in Atlanta was not an attempt to hide, but a necessary step to organize JonBenét's funeral and lean on their support network. He also highlighted their willingness to cooperate with the investigation, noting that they later returned to Boulder to help Burke resume school and assist the police, directly contradicting the idea that they were avoiding scrutiny. John suggested that the fleeing narrative may have been amplified by Boulder's local media, which he believed was preoccupied with protecting the city's reputation. John admitted to naivety, having trusted in the safety of their Boulder community, neglecting to lock doors or set alarms, a mistake that haunted him. His frustration with the investigation led him to advocate for systemic change, proposing that child murder be treated as a federal offense like bank robbery, though the Department of Justice informed him that federal authority was limited. In recent interactions with Boulder's new police chief, John maintained a diplomatic approach, avoiding confrontation despite decades of disappointment, hopeful that new leadership might advance the case. He remained open about uncertainties, such as whether JonBenet had ever been abused prior to her murder, acknowledging the limits of his knowledge while firmly rejecting the accusations against him as a product of a flawed and biased investigation. For more details, he was particularly incensed that the police failed to conduct a neighborhood survey or go door to door, a fundamental step he considered a massive oversight. Early on, he learned that critical evidence, such as items sent to a lab in January 1997, was returned untested for reasons unclear to him, possibly due to cost or deliberate neglect.
We know from looking at reports and stuff early on in January 97, there were a number of items sent into a lab. Some were returned untested. Don't know why. Whether it's a cost issue or they had a sample. They did get a sample of what they tested. Maybe they decided that's good enough. I don't know. We want those other items tested. We want the items that had previously been tested 15 years ago, most recently, retested, developing this new format that's needed to do the genealogy research.
He questioned whether key items, like the rope around JonBenét's neck or the toilet, which someone had used but not flushed, were ever tested for DNA, noting that such samples could have been pivotal. He also clarified that the wooden handle of the garrote was not tested, though the rope itself may have been, underscoring the police's inconsistent approach to forensic evidence. The police's quick fixation on John and his family deepened his sense of betrayal. The day after the murder, a colleague warned him to hire a defense attorney because the police were convinced he was the killer, a suspicion that emerged before any thorough investigation.
They were so focused on convicting Patsy or me that nothing else mattered. And then in January, they had sent some evidence in for DNA sampling, and the report came back middle of January. We've recovered unidentified male DNA from JonBenét's clothing. Does not match anyone in the family. John, Patsy, and Burke are excluded. Right. Well, the police kept that a secret from the DA for 6 months because it conflicted with their conclusion. It's like, holy crap, what do we got to do about this? Because that's the first question the defense attorney would ask is, whose DNA is that? Oh, we don't know, but it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. Male DNA found in a sexual assault case is a huge clue, and to discount it is absurd.
John was shocked to learn later that the police withheld DNA results, which showed no match to the family, from the district attorney for 6 months, as it contradicted their theory that he or Patsy was responsible. He found this concealment absurd, especially since male DNA from the crime scene was a significant clue in an assault case. He also noted a palm print on the door to the JonBenét was found that didn't match anyone in the family. A critical piece of evidence largely ignored by investigators. John emphasized his family's full cooperation, providing phone records, credit card details, bank access, and handwriting samples, including both right and left-hand samples for the ransom note, whenever requested. Despite this, the police's focus remained on him and Patsy, with no apparent effort to explore other leads. He recounted how the forensic team spent only 2 hours initially examining the crime scene, requiring the district attorney to order them back, a reflection of their carelessness.
Well, the forensics people only spent 2 hours in our house after JonBenet was found looking for evidence. The DA said, get your what back in there. 2 hours is not enough. So they went back. I don't know how long they spent when they went back. They did find, they recovered the evidence, some evidence, and a palm print.
He also highlighted a rift between the police and the DA, with the police pushing for arrests based on their belief that the parents were guilty, while the DA demanded evidence they couldn't provide, stalling the case for years. His frustration extended to the handling of physical evidence, which he feared might have been lost or deliberately untested. He repeatedly asked where the evidence was stored, questioning why it wasn't being analyzed, especially with modern DNA techniques available. John even offered to personally fund advanced DNA testing, but the police rejected his proposal without explanation. He speculated that the only logical reasons for their inaction were that the evidence was lost, a possibility he dreaded, or that they were protecting someone, though he dismissed the latter as unlikely but not impossible. He also considered whether the police feared litigation, a concern he explored early on when he contemplated suing them for their flawed conclusions. However, he was advised that such a lawsuit would likely fail due to the broad discretion afforded to police. Among the related people, John Ramsey expressed deep skepticism and concern about Fleet White's actions and demeanor following JonBenét's murder, particularly focusing on inconsistencies that raised red flags. He was baffled by the claim that Fleet opened the basement door, where JonBenét's body was found, but failed to see her, emphasizing that her body was visible the moment the door was opened. John found this account implausible. describing it as a significant issue that didn't add up, suggesting either Fleet overlooked something obvious or his story was questionable.
If that's true, that's a huge red flag. She was right there. I mean, it
Because you, like, the second you open the door,
Oh.
you see the
in a
white blanket.
microsecond.
Doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. And that's, again, you don't know if that's fiction or fact. There's so much fiction that was put out.
He noted that this moment, among others, cast doubt on Fleet's reliability, especially given the gravity of the situation. Fleet's behavior, after speaking with the police, further troubled John. After returning from a 2-hour interview with investigators, Fleet appeared markedly different, prompting John to suspect that the police had manipulated him.
First of all, I think the police took Fleet away from the home we were in that morning, or the day after. And he came back after a couple hours and was different. I think the police were leveraging Fleet to use him. You know, we have evidence that the family killed JonBenét and you need to help us here. I don't know, but they said he was different when he came back from meeting with the police for 2 hours.
He speculated that they might have pressured Fleet by suggesting the Ramsey family was guilty and needed his help to confirm their suspicions, potentially sowing discord. This change in Fleet's demeanor was so pronounced that friends in Atlanta, where Fleet stayed after the family relocated for JonBenét's funeral, found his behavior bizarre and unsettling. They demanded he leave their home, describing him as erratic and screwy, a stark departure from the friend John once trusted.
My brother called me a day or so later and said, "Do you have a gun in the house?" And I said, "No." "Well, Fleet is on his way to your house." We were with Patsy's parents.
John recounted additional disturbing incident involving Fleet, including an episode where Fleet's actions alarmed John's brother. After traveling to Atlanta, Fleet's erratic behavior led John's brother to call and ask if John kept a gun in the house, warning that something was wrong with Fleet. John also recalled Fleet barging into a private meeting with a minister, an intrusive act that underscored his lack of control under stress. Reflecting on Fleet's history, John noted that Fleet struggled in high-pressure situations, recalling a sailing trip where rough weather left Fleet flustered and overwhelmed, suggesting that the intensity of the murder investigation may have pushed him to a breaking point. The mysterious 911 call made from the Ramsey home on December 23, just 2 days before the murder, added to John's concerns. Fleet, who was staying at the house, claimed it was a misdeal, but John couldn't recall if the police responded or simply called back to confirm it was a mistake. Despite its significance, John admitted he never directly confronted Fleet about the call, a decision that left the incident unresolved and suspicious. Similarly, John was aware of Priscilla White's cryptic remark to Patsy that she might know something and needed a few minutes to discuss it, but he didn't elaborate on this, instead expressing a broader distrust. He stated that any mail in Boulder on December 25 or 26, 1996, including Fleet, was a suspect in his mind, reflecting his eroded trust in those around him. John Ramsey also provided detailed insights into his theories about the suspect in JonBenét's murder, emphasizing the calculated nature of the crime and the police's failure to pursue key leads. He was convinced that the killer had been in their home before, likely entering while the family was out for dinner on the evening of the murder and waiting for their return. This belief was reinforced by his suspicion that the intruder had prior knowledge of the family, evidenced by the ransom note's demand for $20,000, which matched his bonus, a detail possibly gleaned from documents in the house.
The 2 weeks before her murder, our company had achieved $1 billion in sales for the year. And for us, that was a big deal. And I wasn't even paying attention. And our financial guy said, "Hey, we're going to hit $1 billion. Holy mackerel, we need to have a party for our employees and make a big deal of it." And our marketing lady said, let's let the newspaper know. And I had this gut feeling, another lesson, pay attention to your gut feelings. I had this gut feeling, it's a bad idea. But I let him do it.
He expressed regret over publicizing his company's $1 billion sales milestone weeks prior, as he had a gut feeling it was a bad idea, potentially drawing attention from someone envious or resentful. A motive supported by profiler John Douglas's theory that the killer was driven by personal anger or jealousy toward John, not JonBenét herself. John highlighted specific evidence pointing to an intruder, such as a suitcase found standing upright under an open basement window, which he believed was used as a step to exit the house. Fibers from JonBenét's clothing and a doll were reportedly found inside, supporting Lou Smith's theory that the killer attempted to transport her body in the suitcase but failed, indicating the crime went awry. John speculated that a stun gun was used to subdue JonBenét before she was taken to the basement, though he couldn't pinpoint when the plan derailed. He noted a similar incident in the same neighborhood 9 months later, where a mother interrupted an intruder targeting her daughter, suggesting a possible connection that Boulder police dismissed despite its striking similarities. Regarding specific suspects, John discussed Gary Oliva, a lead provided by the district attorney, who believed the police failed to investigate him thoroughly. His investigators verified circumstantial evidence about Oliva and handed it to the police, who interviewed him but quickly dismissed the lead. John found Oliva's promising handwriting samples compelling, but was frustrated by the lack of follow-up. He also addressed broader suspicions about the killer's profile, noting Douglas's observation that the ransom note contained movie quotes, indicating a young, unsophisticated individual obsessed with action films, possibly acting out a Hollywood-style kidnapping fantasy. John agreed with Smith's assertion that this was a DNA case, solvable only through the unidentified male DNA found at the scene, which the police inexplicably tried to discredit, even seeking funding to travel to China to explain away the non-matching results. John raised concerns about potential prior access to their home, recalling a housekeeper's account of a man seen in their Michigan home's garage the previous summer, and an open suitcase found in JonBenét's room, which she assumed was permitted, but John confirmed was not. He found it illogical that a squatter would choose JonBenét's isolated second-floor room, suggesting deliberate targeting rather than random intrusion. He also pondered whether JonBenét had been abused before, admitting he and Patsy never suspected it, but acknowledging the prevalence of child abuse, leaving the possibility open. John was puzzled by the sexual assault element, if the motive was personal against him, describing the killer as a crazy, demented human being whose actions defied logical explanation. Smith's theory that multiple individuals might have been involved intrigued John, especially since Smith claimed to know details only the killer would, which he kept confidential even at his death. John was frustrated that critical evidence, like the 3-page ransom note, which Douglas believed was written before the murder, due to its length and composure, was not fully leveraged. The note's premeditated nature, combined with the killer's apparent familiarity with the house and John's finances, reinforced his belief that the crime was planned, not impulsive. His exasperation with the police's refusal to pursue these leads, coupled with their dismissal of DNA evidence and failure to investigate incidents like the neighborhood break-in, underscored his conviction that the killer was someone with a personal vendetta who had studied the family closely. John Ramsey articulated a passionate commitment to policy advocacy aimed at reforming how unsolved homicide cases, like JonBenét's, are handled, driven by his frustration with systemic failures. He actively supported the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act, successfully passed at the federal level, and was working to see it adopted in Colorado.
We had no rights. Police, the only requirement they had was to talk to us once a year on our case. That, by law, they had to do that. And first time we asked for that meeting, they said, "Well, geez, we don't know how to do this exactly. You're a suspect and you're a victim." This Homicide Victims Family Rights Act gives families like us the right, under law.
He explained that a dedicated group was pushing for its passage in the state that year, with the goal of empowering families to formally request case reviews after a set period, ensuring authorities must respond rather than ignore them as he felt Boulder police had done. John expressed enthusiasm for advocating this law in other states, viewing it as a way to help families in similar situations, transforming his personal tragedy into a broader fight for justice. He envisioned the law as a potential legacy for JonBenét, expressing hope that it would ensure her death had a lasting, positive impact by improving the justice system. He believed that if her case catalyzed legal change, it would mean she didn't die for nothing, a sentiment that underscored his determination to honor her memory through reform. To this end, John had written letters to every 2020 presidential candidate, including Joe Biden, urging them to address the flaws in handling cold cases, elevating his advocacy to a national level. He also met directly with Colorado's governor to request a task force of outside experts, only to be told the governor lacked authority unless the district attorney initiated action, a structural limitation he found deeply frustrating. To compensate for police inaction, John and his family hired private investigators, former FBI agents, and DNA labs to conduct the work he believed authorities should have done. They even proposed specific experts, including top FBI and DNA specialists, to assist Boulder police. But these offers were consistently rejected. His advocacy for the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act included a provision requiring agencies to address legitimate family requests to reopen cases, a direct response to the decades of silence and obstruction he faced. Through these efforts, John sought to create a system where families could demand accountability, ensuring that no other parent would endure the prolonged injustice he experienced in seeking answers for JonBenét. John Ramsey's responses during the podcast interview reveal a distinct pattern in his communication style that raises questions about his candor. He frequently employs vague language, relying on phrases that allow him to sidestep direct answers without committing to specifics. This approach creates a buffer, enabling him to add accountability while maintaining an appearance of cooperation. His responses often lack the depth or curiosity one might expect from someone deeply invested in resolving a tragic and unresolved case, suggesting a deliberate effort to control the narrative rather than engage fully with the questions posed. A notable characteristic of Ramsey's answers is his apparent lack of emotional reaction when confronted with inconsistencies or challenging questions. When pressed on sensitive topics, he does not display the discomfort, defensiveness, or urgency typically associated with someone caught off guard or seeking clarity. Instead, he smoothly shifts the conversation or dismisses discrepancies with minimal acknowledgement, a behavior that can indicate a rehearsed or guarded approach. This detachment extends to his minimal curiosity about unresolved details, which is striking for someone claiming to seek answers in a high-profile case. Ramsey's communication also includes tactics that obscure the truth without outright fabrication. He often introduces extraneous details or tangents that divert attention from the core issue, a method that muddies the waters and prevents deeper scrutiny. Additionally, he uses qualifiers that provide wiggle room, allowing him to backtrack or reinterpret his statements if challenged. These strategies suggest an intent to manipulate the listener's perception, prioritizing narrative control over transparency. Overall, Ramsey's response style combines ambiguity, emotional detachment, and strategic misdirection. These elements work together to create a shield against probing questions, leaving the impression that his primary goal is to protect a crafted version of events, rather than uncover the truth. This pattern of behavior invites skepticism about the sincerity of his account and suggests a calculated effort to manage how his story is perceived. John Ramsey's interview provides a revealing look into his narrative surrounding the unsolved 1996 murder of his daughter, JonBenét Ramsey. The discussion, led by host Ashley Flowers, probes Ramsey's account of the events, uncovering several suspicious points that suggest he may be concealing the truth. It posits that Burke Ramsey, who was 9 at the time, may have accidentally or intentionally caused JonBenét's death. and that John and Patsy Ramsey staged a kidnapping to protect their son. This examination focuses on Ramsey's responses, highlighting his evasive language, lack of curiosity, and inconsistencies regarding the ransom note, his wife Patsy, his son Burke, his cooperation with the police, the decision to hire separate attorneys, the CNN interview, and the family's move to Atlanta. Each area reveals patterns of potential deception, including lies of commission, omission, and information treatment, as well as a consistent lack of engagement with critical details that raises doubts about Ramsey's sincerity. When questioned about the ransom note, John Ramsey's responses are marked by vagueness and a reluctance to engage with discrepancies, casting doubt on his truthfulness. Ashley Flowers asks how his perspective on the note has evolved over the 30 years since the murder, and Ramsey responds that it didn't make any sense, before falling back on phrases like, "I don't know," when pressed about inconsistencies in Patsy's account. For example, Patsy claimed to have read only the first page of the note, which stated, "We have your daughter." Yet she referenced details from later sections, such as the signature, Victory, SBTC, and concerns about a marked police car mentioned further in the document. Ramsey's failure to address these contradictions or show curiosity about them is striking. A parent desperate to find their child's killer would likely question how their spouse knew information they shouldn't have or push for further investigation into the note's origins. Instead, Ramsey's reliance on, "I don't know," suggests an attempt to avoid accountability, a tactic often used to sidestep sensitive topics. Additionally, Ramsey shows no interest in exploring a key lead, the ransom amount of $180,000, which matched his Lockheed Martin bonus. He casually notes that his pay stubs were laying around somewhere, but expresses no desire to investigate who might have accessed them or to check for fingerprints. This lack of curiosity points to a lie of omission, as Ramsey avoids pursuing a detail that could identify the killer. Or, as the analysis suggests, because he knows there was no kidnapper, and the note was likely crafted by Patsy under his guidance. Ramsey's failure to publicize the note, despite the success of publishing the Unabomber's manifesto to generate leads, further indicates that he is not genuinely focused on finding the perpetrator, supporting the theory that the note was part of a staged cover-up. John Ramsey's unwavering defense of his late wife, Patsy, and his lack of interest in her contradictory statements further heightens suspicions. When Ashley highlights discrepancies in Patsy's account of the ransom note, such as knowing details from pages she didn't claim to read, Ramsey responds with, "I don't know," and quickly shifts to praising Patsy as a wonderful mother who never said anything negative about anybody. This claim appears to be a lie of commission, an exaggerated statement that's difficult to verify and seems designed to portray Patsy as unimpeachable. A truthful victim, particularly one whose spouse's story contains inconsistencies, would typically show some level of suspicion, even if only to eliminate possibilities. For instance, real victims often question their loved ones out of a desperate need for answers, akin to checking if a spouse is hiding a lost item. Yet Ramsey displays no such inclination, despite the fact that his own handwriting expert couldn't rule out Patsy as the note's author. His refusal to engage with these discrepancies suggests a lie of omission, as he avoids confronting evidence that might implicate Patsy. This behavior aligns with someone who already knows the truth and has no need to investigate further. By staunchly defending Patsy and dismissing her inconsistencies, Ramsey appears to be safeguarding a narrative that protects his family from scrutiny, consistent with the theory that he and Patsy staged the crime scene to cover for Burke. Ramsey's responses about his son Burke are equally concerning, particularly his refusal to explore what Burke might know about the night of JonBenét's murder. When Ashley asks if Ramsey ever questioned Burke about whether he saw or heard anything, especially since Burke admitted on a television program to sneaking downstairs to play with a toy after JonBenet was put to bed, Ramsey claims never asked him, and is unsure if Burke even came downstairs dismissing the account as fiction. This lack of curiosity is remarkable, especially given Ramsey's repeated assertions that he's willing to do anything to find the killer. Most parents would at least ask their child if they noticed anything unusual, particularly after an admission of being awake during the critical time. Ramsey's insistence that Burke would have said something, if he knew anything, is a form of information treatment, deflecting the question on Burke's character rather than addressing the possibility that he holds vital information. This avoidance points to a lie of omission, as Ramsey's failure to probe Burke's account, even 30 years later, is inconsistent with a genuine desire to solve the case. This behavior supports the theory that Ramsey is sidestepping questions that could unravel the staged kidnapping narrative, as Burke's knowledge might implicate the family. Ramsey's casual dismissal of Burke's inconsistencies, without any embarrassment or follow-up, further suggests a pattern of deception typical of someone unconcerned with being caught in a lie because they control the story. Ramsey's claims about cooperating with the police also raise doubts, as they conflict with external accounts and suggest possible deception. He asserts that he and Patsy provided everything the police requested, including phone records, credit card records, and bank account access, early on. However, reports indicate that some records, such as phone records, were only provided a year later, and the clothing worn on the morning of the murder was requested after a significant delay. This discrepancy suggests a lie of commission, as Ramsey's claim of immediate and full cooperation appears to exaggerate or misrepresent the truth. A parent genuinely seeking justice would likely ensure that all evidence, especially something as critical as the clothing worn that day, was promptly provided. Ramsey's nonchalant attitude toward these delays, without acknowledging their impact on the investigation, indicates he may have intentionally slowed the process to hinder the police, aligning with the theory that he was protecting a fabricated story. His lack of concern about unidentified fibers or pubic hairs found at the scene, which could have been linked to the clothing, further underscores his apparent disinterest in pursuing leads that might reveal the truth. The decision to hire separate attorneys for John and Patsy immediately after the murder is another suspicious point that hints at deception. Ramsey explains that he was advised to hire a lawyer the day after JonBenét's death because the police suspected him, and he agreed without hesitation. He notes that one attorney couldn't represent both him and Patsy due to potential conflicts of interest. But this swift move to secure legal representation is unusual for innocent victims. Typically, victims prioritize cooperating with authorities over lawyering up, especially so soon after a tragedy. Ramsey's focus on the police's premature suspicion as the reason for hiring attorneys feels like information treatment, deflecting from the possibility that he and Patsy needed legal protection because they were involved in a cover-up. This early legal strategy suggests Ramsey was more concerned with self-preservation than finding the killer, supporting the theory that the family was preparing a defense against potential accusations. The interview, which Ramsey admits was a horrible mistake, reveals further inconsistencies that point to deception. He initially claims the interview was by friends who wanted to protect Boulder's reputation and portray the Ramseys as normal people. However, he later admits the real purpose was to counter media accusations that he and Patsy were the killers, contradicting his earlier explanation. This shift is a lie of commission, as the Boulder reputation excuse is illogical, publicizing a madman on the loose would damage, not enhance, the city's image. Ramsey's true motive was likely to control the narrative and deflect suspicion, consistent with a strategy to manipulate public perception. His claim that he hadn't consulted his attorneys before the interview, despite their later insistence on avoiding media, strains credibility, suggesting he may be downplaying the calculated nature of his media appearances. Finally, Ramsey's explanation for moving to Atlanta shortly after the murder raises suspicions of evasion. He insists the move was to bury JonBenét in the family cemetery and return to their home. where they had a support system. However, his quick departure from Boulder, where the investigation was ongoing, was perceived by the media as fleeing. Ramsey's vague recollection of asking a detective for permission to leave, coupled with phrases like, "That's not quite the way it was," suggests information treatment to obscure the true reasons for the move. Leaving Boulder so soon could have been a strategic retreat to avoid further scrutiny, aligning with the theory that Ramsey was protecting a fabricated narrative. His lack of clarity about the timeline and details of this decision further fuels doubts about his transparency. In conclusion, John Ramsey's interview is fraught with suspicious points that suggest deception. His evasive language, lack of curiosity, and contradictory explanations about the ransom note, Patsy, Burke, police cooperation, hiring attorneys, the CNN interview, and the move to Atlanta point to a pattern of lying through commission, omission, and information treatment. These behaviors align with the theory that Ramsey is concealing the truth about a staged kidnapping to protect Burke. His dismissive attitude toward inconsistencies and disinterest in pursuing leads undermine his claims of innocence, reinforcing suspicions of a cover-up. Further examination of Ramsey's other interviews and official case records could provide additional insight. But the interview alone reveals a troubling pattern of potential deception. John Ramsey's numerous media appearances since the 1996 murder of his daughter, JonBenét Ramsey, have consistently sparked controversy, with accusations of deception, narrative manipulation, and unresolved inconsistencies about the case. Comparing his interviews across platforms before, many questionable motives for engaging with the media, contradictions surrounding the ransom note, and his handling of suspicions about family members, particularly Burke Ramsey. Each interview reflects a pattern of public skepticism about John's candor, with critics arguing he uses these platforms to deflect suspicion rather than advance the investigation. In the 1997 interview, conducted just a week after JonBenét's death, John and Patsy Ramsey spoke to thank supporters and address their grief. But the decision to go public so soon after the tragedy drew significant criticism. Analysts, including Mark Mocklish, noted that their focus on gratitude, rather than a direct appeal to catch the killer, was unusual for parents of a murdered child. This fueled speculation that the interview was a calculated move to shape public perception and counter media portrayals of the Ramseys as suspects. The controversy over his motives, justice versus image management, resurfaced in later appearances, such as the 2024 documentary, where the narrative heavily favored the intruder theory while downplaying evidence implicating the family, prompting accusations of selective storytelling. The ransom note, demanding $100,000 and matching John's Lockheed bonus, has been a persistent point of contention across his interviews. In the 2020 Lotters 20 interview with Barbara Walters, Patsy's claim that she was unaware of John's bonus amount was met with skepticism, as it seemed implausible that an outsider could know such a specific figure. Handwriting experts' inability to fully clear Patsy as the noter further intensified doubts. Similarly, in the 2000 Larry King Live interview, John and Patsy's explanation that the note was a distraction by the killer failed to address why it was written at the scene or why the body was left behind, contradicting the kidnapping narrative. This issue persisted in the 2024 Fox News digital interview, where John suggested the note's amount came from pay stubs but showed little curiosity about how an intruder accessed them. Critics argue that his reluctance to engage with these inconsistencies across multiple platforms suggests an effort to avoid scrutiny of the note's origins, possibly pointing to a family member's involvement. Suspicions about Burke Ramsey, who was 9 at the time of the murder, have also been a recurring source of controversy. In the 2002 interview with Erin Moriarty, John defensively dismissed any suggestion of Burke's involvement, calling such theories absurd, yet he sidestepped questions about Burke's behavior or psychological evaluations. This pattern continued in the Twinner documentary, where John emphasized Burke's innocence, but avoided addressing discrepancies, such as Burke's later claim on Ducker. Phil that he was awake and playing with a toy on the night of the murder. Critics find John's lack of curiosity about these inconsistencies suspicious. A critique also echoed in online discussions following the 2024 documentary, where Burke's absence from the narrative raised questions about whether he was avoiding scrutiny. The persistent defense of Burke, coupled with vague responses, has fueled theories that John may be protecting his son, possibly from an accidental act covered up by the family. John's portrayal of the Boulder police as incompetent or biased has been another consistent point of contention. In the 1997 interview, he criticized the police for focusing on the Ramseys without evidence, a theme he reiterated in the 2002 segment, where he accused them of mishandling the case by not initially treating it as a kidnapping. However, this narrative is contentious, as critics point out that the Ramseys limited cooperation, such as delaying formal police interviews and relying on their attorney, L. Lynn Wood, hindered the investigation. In the 2025 interview with Anderson Cooper, John expressed optimism about new police leadership and DNA testing, but this shift was seen by some as inconsistent with his earlier criticisms, suggesting a strategic pivot to appear cooperative. His actions, such as moving JonBenét's body, which potentially compromised evidence, were also questioned in the 2002 interview, with critics arguing that a focus on police failures deflects from his own questionable decisions. The accusation that John uses media appearances to garner sympathy rather than solve the case is a thread running through all his interviews. In the 2020 Day 20 interview, he and Patsy detailed the financial and emotional toll of the case, which some viewed as an attempt to evoke pity rather than provide new leads. Similarly, in the 2024 Fox News digital interview, Johns minced a mysterious letter from a woman claiming her ex-husband was the killer was criticized as vague and potentially attention-seeking, lacking concrete follow-up. The 2024 documentary further amplified this controversy, with Reddit users arguing that John's participation in such platforms exploits the case's notoriety to maintain public relevance while offering little substantive progress. His emphasis on personal suffering and external leads, like DNA, is seen by detractors as a way to shift focus from unresolved questions about the family's actions. In conclusion, John Ramsey's interviews, from the 1997 appearance to the 2024 documentary, are marked by controversies over his evasive language, questionable motives, and handling of key evidence like the ransom note and suspicions about Burke. While he consistently presents himself as a grieving father seeking justice, critics across these platforms argue that his vague responses and selective focus on police failures or DNA evidence suggest an effort to obscure the truth. The debates over his candor, cooperation, and narrative control remain strikingly consistent, reflecting the enduring public divide over whether John Ramsey is a victim of a flawed investigation or complicit in concealing a darker family secret. John Ramsey's media appearances have consistently been framed by him as efforts to seek justice for his daughter, JonBenét's murder, by pressuring the Boulder police to pursue new leads, particularly DNA testing. He emphasizes the police's alleged incompetence and advocates for advanced forensic methods to identify an intruder, maintaining his family's innocence. However, critics argue his true purpose is to control the public narrative and deflect suspicion from the Ramseys. His evasive responses, especially regarding the ransom note's inconsistencies and Burke's potential involvement, suggest to skeptics an intent to obscure the truth, possibly to protect a family secret. John's focus on personal suffering and external leads, like a mysterious letter mentioned in 2024, often overshadows concrete investigative contributions, fueling accusations of attention-seeking. While he claims to keep the case alive for resolution, his selective engagement with sympathetic platforms and reluctance to address incriminating evidence raise doubts about his motives. Ultimately, John's interviews reflect a dual aim: to advocate for his daughter's case while managing public perception, leaving unresolved whether his goal is justice or exoneration of his family. The JonBenét Ramsey case, mired in controversy and unresolved for nearly 3 decades, offers profound lessons about the complexities of criminal investigations, media influence, and the human toll of unsolved crimes. John Ramsey's numerous interviews, from his 1997 appearance to the 2024 documentary, reveal a saga marked by distrust, speculation, and systemic failures, providing insights that resonate beyond the specifics of the tragedy. One critical lesson is the peril of premature assumptions in investigations. The Boulder Police's early focus on the Ramsey family, driven by the unusual ransom note and the body's discovery in the home, illustrates how tunnel vision can derail justice. John's consistent criticism of law enforcement's bias highlights the need for objective, evidence-driven approaches. The failure to initially treat the case as a kidnapping, coupled with not pursuing leads like the unidentified male DNA, underscores the importance of thoroughness and openness to alternative theories. Modern forensic advancements, like genealogical DNA testing, which John advocates for, emphasize how evolving technology can offer hope for cold cases, but only if law enforcement prioritizes its use over preconceived narratives. Another lesson lies in the destructive power of media and public scrutiny. John's interviews, intended to pressure police or clear his family's name, often backfired, intensifying suspicion due to his evasive responses and perceived narrative control. The 1997 CNN interview, conducted days after JonBenét's death, exemplifies how premature media exposure can fuel speculation rather than clarity. The case became a cultural phenomenon, with the Ramseys' wealth, JonBenét's pageant involvement, and the ransom note's oddities dissected relentlessly. This frenzy distorted public perception, turning a grieving family into suspects and overshadowing the search for truth. It serves as a cautionary tale about the media's role in shaping narratives, often at the expense of investigative progress, and the need for responsible reporting that prioritizes facts over sensationalism. The case also highlights the human cost of unresolved trauma. John's interviews reveal a father grappling with loss, financial ruin, and relentless scrutiny, yet his vague answers and focus on external leads raise questions about transparency. The toll on the Ramsey family, Patsy's death in 2006, Burke's retreat from public life, and John's ongoing advocacy, underscores how unsolved cases leave lasting scars. The controversy over Burke's potential involvement, dismissed by John but debated publicly, reflects the pain of familial suspicion. This teaches us the importance of empathy for victims' families, even amidst skepticism, and the need for support systems to help them navigate grief and public judgment. Finally, the case exposes the limitations of justice systems in small jurisdictions. John's push for the Homicide Victims' Family Rights Act, discussed in his 2025 interview, highlights the need for federal oversight in complex cases mishandled by local authorities. The Boulder Police's inexperience with murder investigations, as John noted, led to critical errors, such as mishandling the crime scene. This suggests that systemic reforms, including better training and resource allocation, are essential to prevent similar failures. In conclusion, the JonBenét Ramsey case teaches us to approach investigations with rigor, temper media influence with responsibility, and recognize the enduring human impact of unresolved crimes. It calls for humility in the face of uncertainty and a commitment to leveraging science and empathy to seek truth, ensuring justice does not remain forever out of reach.